This week on HomeKit News, the Aqara Hub M3 with Matter, Thread and Zigbee. Welcome back everybody. So we finally have the Aqara Hub M3, which features amongst other things a thread border router, so you can now add the recently released motion sensor P2 to the Aqara app. It also has a Matter controller, which means it will work with third-party Matter devices too, but more on that later. As Zigbee is still very much alive, this is also a Zigbee 3 hub, so all of your existing Aqara Zigbee products will work fine with the M3. It also has Bluetooth, although I suspect that's really just for onboarding Matter devices which use Bluetooth for initial discovery. It'll work with Matter platforms, but you can still use it with Amazon and Google using the legacy methods, and Apple Home of course using the included HomeKit QR code. Some of the features include something called edge computing, aimed at making communications both local and encrypted, but with additional features that keep your system working even when some hubs go down. Like the M2, this has Wi-Fi and Ethernet connections, but the M3 also offers 5 GHz Wi-Fi connectivity, which is a step up. Also like the M2, the M3 contains an IR blaster, but with the addition that this can now expose AC controls to Apple Home, although there is a caveat, which I'll mention in a bit. There's support for third-party Matter products, albeit a little limited right now for Thread, Wi-Fi and bridged devices. Finally, Aqara has heard the complaints about the tired old speaker in the M2 and beefed up the volume for the M3 considerably. Whilst Aqara did send the M3 that I've been testing for a couple of weeks, I did actually purchase the Chinese M3 myself back in January, which I also tested. At this point I should say that not everything has been plain sailing, so keep watching to see any of the issues I've had. So what's in the box? We get the M3 itself of course, which looks very nice, I have to say. A multi-language manual is also included, a USB-C to USB-A cable, but no power brick as expected these days. You don't get an Ethernet cable either. A wall mount if you want to place it on a vertical surface or ceiling, and finally some fixings for the aforementioned wall mount. Just a note regarding the manual, it comes with a standard Matter QR code on the back, but it also comes with a standard HomeKit code as well as an Aqara QR code. You shouldn't need these codes for initial setup in the Aqara app, however. Let's dive a little deeper into the device itself, and a bit over 4 inches in width and depth and just under 1.5 inches in height. It's about 10% bigger than the M2. On the edge is a pairing or reset button as well as QR codes for HomeKit and Aqara, and although it doesn't have the Matter QR code on the body, this will be stored in the Aqara app if you happen to lose the manual. There's a solitary LED that is blue in normal operation and changes colour depending on the mode it's in. The underside is home to the loudspeaker as well as an Ethernet port and a USB-C port for power, although if you have a router or internet switch capable of power over Ethernet, you could power the M3 with just the Ethernet cable. Despite the presence of all the QR codes, installation for the Aqara app is actually quite easy. So after connecting the M3 to power and clicking Add Accessory, the M3 should be automatically discovered using Bluetooth, so ensure it's active on your iPhone. It'll ask for a pairing code, so in this case you need the Aqara code. Don't use the Matter code option. Once added, just name it and place it in a room. From there you have the option to add it to other systems, so in this case I can add it to Apple HomeKit or any Matter platform, which does in fact include Apple Home. I'm going to select the Matter option, the reasons for which I'll explain later, and strangely enough, even with this option you don't actually need to scan the Matter QR code. As with other devices in HomeKit, you name it and place it in a room, although as a hub it won't show in the room you chose within the HomeKit app. You can see here it's now connected to Apple Home. Here's the Matter QR code if you need to reset it and add it again at some point. Going into Apple Home and the Home Hubs and Bridges section, you can see the M3 listed and in the correct room, but because it's added using Matter, you can see that under the Security tab in the living room where it's placed, there's no alarm listed, unlike the other hubs. This is because Matter doesn't yet support alarm systems. So why didn't I use the HomeKit method to add this? Well, that's a good question which I'll go into later. In the Eve app under the Thread network, you can see my 4 HomePods Mini along with the device labelled Router C4, which is in fact the Thread border router in the M3, so it's part of my HomeKit Thread network essentially. If you purchased the P2 motion sensor with Matter over Thread, you'll now be able to add it to the Aqara app. However, at the time of making this video, there are limited benefits to doing so. In the settings for the P2, you do get logs for both light and motion sensor, but at first glance there seems to be currently no options to change the settings for sensitivity or the motion sensor's cooldown period. That said, you can still include it in Aqara automations, which is still a good thing, which also includes options for battery status, presence, absence, and illumination levels. The reason I chose Matter instead of HomeKit for installation in the Home app is because the latter allows me to expose the IR blaster, which controls ACs, to be exposed to Apple Home. So in this case, I'm going to add my Hitachi AC unit to the setup here, and after a few attempts at getting it to find the right set of controls, which involved testing a few basic functions, it was added successfully. Once added, I get a pretty comprehensive set of controls as you can see here. So to get it fully working in Apple Home 2, you'd need to add an Aqara temperature sensor to the M3 to work with the AC controller. I didn't have one installed at the time when I set up the AC, but it still worked anyway. After adding a sensor, as you can see here, it's all working great. Hopping over to HomeKit, you can see the tile for my AC. You only get the basics unfortunately, but with the addition of the temperature sensor, the AC shows accurate temperature, which is what you need. Without the sensor, the AC will show a default temperature reading that doesn't change. You can also see here that the temperature reading showing for the AC correlates to the readings from the actual temperature sensor. One interesting option the M3 offers is hub migration. This allows you to move all devices and automations connected to one Aqara hub over to the M3. This won't work with the original M1 hub or the G2H camera hub, however. If I go into the M3 settings page and scroll to the bottom, you have the hub migration option. It shows my current hubs on the US server available for migration. So if I select one of the M2 hubs, you then get a section where it explains the process, which you should be aware does reset the M3 hub at first, then receives the data from the old hub, after which it'll wipe the data from the old hub. With that in mind, it does make sense to use the migration tool before adding the M3 to other Matter platforms, including Apple Home, although it's not entirely clear if the connection to Apple Home is retained during the hub being cleared of data. Being that the M3 is a Matter controller, it makes sense that you can add other Matter devices, right? Well, yes, it can to an extent. I recently purchased an additional Hue bridge for this very test. Once updated to the latest firmware, I added it to the M3 using Matter. Looking deeper, you can see I've also got a bulb connected to the Hue bridge, which I can control in Aqara Home and use in scenes and automations. This Hue bulb is full color and white, so you can see I can control it in the Aqara app just as though it was an Aqara product. The reason I chose to do this is to make use of Aqara's on-off toggle action from one button press, which still isn't a thing with Apple Home, at least not without using the convert to shortcut option. Due to Matter for the Hue bridge, I can also add other manufacturers' Zigbee products, which are also exposed to Aqara. So in this case, I've added a trad-free bulb. Once again, I get the same basic controls, although this doesn't do colour, only whites. As mentioned, I can make use of the specific toggle feature featured in the Aqara app, which is shown in these two automations, as well as a lot of other useful functions. So as you've seen, I can add Hue bulbs and other Zigbee devices like the IKEA bulbs via the Hue bridge, but I can also add the Yeelight Cube, for example, as that's a Matter device, albeit using Wi-Fi. Leviton rockers and dimmers will also work with the M3 apparently, as well as the Matter versions of Eve Energy and Eve Thermo. You can also apparently add the Google Nest Thermostat 2020, as well as a few other brands. However, at the time of this video, not all Matter devices will work with the M3, like the Matter Nanoleaf bulbs, for example. I mentioned the M3 has a much improved loudspeaker, so I'm going to do a quick demo using the M2 and the M3 with an Opal wireless switch to trigger the test sounds. If you're listening to this with headphones, please adjust the volume down for this test. Just for clarity, here are the automation set up so you can see both hubs are set to play the same sound at the same volume, which is 50. So the left button, once pressed, will trigger the M2 speaker, with the right button triggering the M3 speaker. The big question is, how has it performed? Well, ordinarily I don't tend to find issues with Aqara products, but in my case, with both the Chinese and international M3s, it did seem to make my thread network a little less robust. Soon after installation, things like my Nanoleaf bulbs became slow to respond, as did my Eve Energy and Wemo plugs, as well as my Wemo dimmer, all of which are HomeKit over thread. However, even my 2.0 button became a little less stable. I thought maybe it would take some time for thread to readjust itself, but these issues, which are intermittent, have not totally gone away. If I remove the M3 after a short period, everything that was unstable then becomes stable again. To be fair, this may be the case of wireless interference, so you may not suffer this issue like I have, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Onto the pros and cons, and due to the M3's matter controller and thread border router functions, I think this is a major step forward for Aqara as a platform, giving users even more choice. I like the M2 as a hub, but with options for power over Ethernet, 5 GHz Wi-Fi and a much louder speaker, this is definitely a worthy successor. With the option to control your AC and have it exposed to HomeKit, this offers international users something only previously available on the Aqara P3, which was only available in China. The next 3 points are not negative, but more like cautions, because I think these points will be addressed in good time. So unlike the SwitchBot Hub 2 or the Nature Remo Nano, only the AC is exposed to HomeKit, so controls for TVs or other devices using IR are only available in the Aqara app. Universal support for Matter devices is not available yet, which I suspect is down to the app side of things rather than the hub itself, but hopefully we'll get more devices that can work with the M3 soon enough. Finally, to the issues I've experienced with other devices after adding the M3. Now hopefully my home being rammed full of tech is causing the issue and you'll be okay, but I'll continue to monitor the situation. So that's our take on the Aqara Hub M3. So what devices are you hoping to add to the Aqara ecosystem and why? Let me know in the comments section below. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it and subscribe if you haven't done so already. In the meantime, stay safe, and I'll leave you with this quote from Jim Carrey, who said, "Behind every great man, there's a woman rolling her eyes."